Tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, we have a very special guest, Jen Walton of Girls Who Chase. We're going to talk about storm chasing and much more along those lines. We have also an active weather pattern with several storms over the next 7 to 8 days to talk about. And one currently is producing some big snows across parts of the Central Plains, and that's heading to the Western Lakes. It has implications for the east, and so do the other storm systems. We'll talk all about that in the long range and so much more right here on tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York. They've got mulch, they've got salt, they've got sand. Whatever it is you need to get you through this winter, should those storms ever come, you might need a snow blower, you might need salt, you might need some de-icing products. You can get them all at Omni. 631-756-1125 is the telephone number, and the website is
OmniTrueValue.com. Good evening, Joe, and also good evening to our special guest tonight, Jennifer Walton, who will talk about chasing storms. And I'm glad she's doing it because I have a yellow streak down my back, and I don't care to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Jen, one of the things that people have asked me about, why don't I chase? And I echo Joe's sentiments. And I never really had a motivation to chase, but you did, and you have turned it into Girls Who Chase. Focusing on women in the science fields. And tell us a little bit, we're going to get started right away. Just with a quick hello to everybody on the chat board. Welcome to tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show. Got any questions for our guests, put them on the chat board, and Joe Rayo will pass them along. So how did this all start?
Well, first of all, thank you both so much for having me. It's so fun to be on a show like this. I don't know actually that I've been on a show like this to talk about Girls Who Chase.
Well, we're happy to have you.
It always cracks me up that there's meteorologists out there and folks who spend a lifetime focusing on weather who either haven't been out in the field or prefer not to be, and prefer to be in studio or behind a book. And I guess that's what makes the world go round. So, I do prefer to be out in the field experiencing it.
We were put out in the field in our careers. I know I have in snowstorms. I just never really felt. I never, and maybe it's because we really didn't know. I don't know that it really existed that much, at least that we knew about. Where you got into a vehicle and you drove to another part of the country and you chased thunderstorms. But anyway, I'm sorry. Just go ahead and continue your train of thought.
I mean, that's fair, right? If all you get to do is stand in a snowstorm and freeze, that's no fun. I don't like doing that either. So yeah, I would say my story parallels a lot of storm chasers in that started out young, terrified of weather. I grew up in the Southeast mostly, which has a lot of nighttime thunderstorms, and I would often end up in my bedroom just because I was so terrified of the lightning and thunder. And then at some point there was a transition from terror to fascination. And however, that's really where the Girls Who Chase story started, I would say, for me, was that I didn't go much further than just being fascinated. So I grew up watching the Weather Channel. My parents would turn the television on after I had been watching, and it was always on the Weather Channel, not so much cartoons and other things that you would expect from kids. And I guess I just liked falling asleep to Weather on the Yates or something. And over the years, consumed all of the storm chasing media. So there were reality shows that came out in the mid 2000s, several of them. The headliner, of course, was Storm Chasers on the Discovery Channel with Reed Timmer and Tim Samaras and many of the other folks we've come to know through that television show. And I think subconsciously and consciously decided chasing was for me for a variety of reasons. One, I didn't go into meteorology. I went into science and environmental communication. Communication is actually my thing. With an environmental bend. I have degrees in both. And spent a lot of time trying to get folks to take me chasing with them, thinking I had to go out with experts and that you had to have a meteorology degree to get out in the field and chase storms well and safely. But I think, didn't realize until much more recently that the other limiting factor was that I hadn't really seen anybody who looked like me storm chasing in media. And by that, I mean women. And so over time, as I entered the storm chasing universe, when I finally decided I was going to go ahead and make this happen myself, discovered that there were some cultural patterns, mostly subconscious, I would say, embedded and kind of perpetuated by media and cultural expectations, and decided to start an Instagram page to showcase female storm chasers and some of their amazing photography and video work, which is frankly just as high quality and accessible as male chasers. But I think we just happened to see it a lot less, and I sure didn't see it when I was consuming, storm chasing media. So I would have to say that I don't think I created the energy that made Girls Who Chase what it is now. I stumbled into an existing area in which there was a lot of interest and energy, and harnessed it, I think is the word I would use. So that Instagram page exploded. And in the last year, we're just under a year now of formal launch, January 2022. We have been in the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, on the Today Show, on the Kelly Clarkson Show, NBC, Fox Weather. It's been nuts.
and now you're on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, which just absolutely eclipses all those small programs that are out
Number
there.
Number one. Yep.
Joe, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe. Jennifer, you say that you noticed with the passage of time that the chasers, the storm chasers, were of the male gender. Yet there is the movie Twister, which came out back in 1996, and one of the key persons in that movie, who was, quote, a storm chaser, was Helen Hunt. So, and after seeing that movie, I got the impression that, it's not relegated only to males, but also to females. But she may have been the exception rather than the rule, at least going all the way back then. Did she was she a hero to you, or somebody to look up to or to aspire to all the way back then?
Funny. Twister continues to sort of be upheld as the primary storm chasing media out there, and chasers are always constantly quoting from the movie, which it's not like the lines were that great, right? So we're talking like cow, another cow, right? Like these are people's favorite lines. Yes, Joe is certainly, I think, a hero to women in storm chasing, but the part that's unfortunate about it, and really to my point, is that movie came out in 1996, and she continues to be upheld as the role model for women in chasing. So we're talking 26 plus years that we have not had an actual female storm chaser kind of step forward as a role model. I think, when you look at female role models who are in media, Ginger Z is the name that typically comes to mind, I think, in broadcast meteorology, because she's a public figure and she's been very successful in the area. But if we were to say, okay, name the top female storm chaser out there, could you do that? Whereas if you ask that question of men, of course, there's 2 or 3 names that come to mind, right? Like Reed Timmer, for example. So that's the issue.
Well, the thing is that you've been doing this now for a while. Now, how many years specifically have you, or how many years has Girls Chasing been around now? Is it relatively new, I would presume, right? The organization.
Girls Who Chase, just under a year. I started storm chasing in 2018. So took me about 5 years to get that ramped up.
Well, now that you're in it, and now that we have the organization, I predict in the next 4 or 5 years, you and your colleagues will become famous across the country, because it's not every day that you get. And I'm not even talking about just women. I mean, men. I mean, it's always blown my mind that there are people out there who, when they see a thunderstorm box for a watch and the potential in the technical discussion that there could be supercells and possible F3 to F4 tornadoes, that instead of running in the other direction like Joe and I would, that there are people like yourself who'll go right straight toward that, wanting to experience
special. That. Definitely a special bunch.
Cecilia Hernandez on the chat board. She's one of our regulars on the chat board here. She has a question for you, Jen. She says, how many storms have you chased, and what kind of equipment do you take storm chasing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I have counted the storms that I've chased, but I definitely have some favorites, like standout favorites. And so I chase probably about 25 times a year on average. As much as I would love for it to be a job, most of the time it's very difficult to make that sustainable. So if you multiply that by 5, I don't know, somewhere in the hundreds. But in terms of equipment, I like to keep it pretty basic. I drive a small SUV because I spend a lot of time on dirt roads. I live out in Colorado, and so I spend a lot of time chasing high plains weather, which is gridded dirt roads, kind of western Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, into the Dakotas. And so use an iPad in the car to see radar. I like to keep an eye on satellite and kind of near-term surface observations. So dew points, any boundaries that might come into play to create storms, any kind of small perturbations that may affect how we're expecting weather will behave in a certain area, et cetera. So the iPad is the big one. I use my cell phone typically to take video and for road mapping. And then I've got a DSLR camera, tripod, et cetera, because I'm much more of a still photographer than a videographer. That's kind of my bread and butter. But I spend a lot of time on Twitter because I always consider my first and foremost job out there is reporting to the Now Weather Service and making sure folks are aware of what's happening in the area.
Well, you just got a very good, an excellent compliment on the chat board from Dennis Cassia. We just mentioned the other day that Dennis is going to be inducted into the Firefighters Hall of Fame in Connecticut in early April. And Dennis says, Jen is like a firefighter. She runs in when everyone else runs out.
I actually am a firefighter, Dennis. I used to be a wildland firefighter, and congratulations to you. That's very true.
There you go.
Des' house daughter on the chat board asks, what was the most memorable storm you have chased?
Oh, well, I also have a few of those. So I would say nothing's ever going to beat the first tornado that I saw on my own. I think that's just a very special experience, especially when, like me, you've waited so long to do something that really, truly brings you joy. But in my case in particular, it was so huge because I think I had wanted that for so long. And it actually was a storm that came out of the foothills. I live just north of Denver, and I was working from home that day in June 2018. And I knew just enough to know that it kind of had the look, and followed it and was on completely the wrong side and should not have been able to see anything, and just got very lucky. And I was in such a rush to get out of the house to chase the storm that I still had my pajamas on. So I was chasing this storm in my pajamas and got stuck in traffic and got stuck in town. I made all these rookie mistakes and crested a hill, and in front of me was my first tornado. And I just have this forever memory of jumping up and down outside my car in my pajamas, shouting kind of at the top of my lungs. So yeah, that'll probably always be my number one.
And I'm sorry, Joe.
No, I'm just going to say John Charles was just on his question on the chat in terms of the, from where you are located right now. So mm-hmm. What's the range of the distance that you would drive to a given chase? Or do you plan out a couple of days ahead of time and say, okay, we're going to go, I'm in Washington, D.C., severe weather's going to be in Kansas, so we got to drive to Kansas?
Well, luckily I live in Colorado, and so I'm close enough to Tornado Alley, but it really does depend. I mean, the last few years in particular, we haven't had a lot of weather here. We've mostly had drought. Until this year, we're getting a lot of snow right now, which is wonderful. But that
send it this way. A lot of people on the chat board are snow lovers, and
yeah,
our New York City is into its 315th consecutive day of a snow drought. There has not been measurable snow in New York in 315 days, and the snow weenies are on their knees now, begging, looking to the sky, and maybe later we'll talk about the prospects of that. So send the snow our way.
I'll send you some for sure. I'm trying not to complain about it because this time last year my house had just nearly burned down in the Marshall Fire. So it's like we're not complaining about the moisture here, but at the same time, like with California right now, it's a bit feast or famine. Like we can't seem to find a happy medium. It's either too much or not enough. So yeah, but to answer the question, it's evolved over the years, and I am a big believer in return on investment. So I'm not going to do a multi-day drive or a big long drive if I don't feel confident I'm going to see something. So if it's just going to be a day's drive for me, I kind of have like a 4 to 5 hour range. And the thing I always have to pay attention to here is I'm always chasing away from home because I live in the Front Range of Colorado, right? And everything goes east. So I have to factor in my return drive. So if I follow something into central Kansas, that either means I'm staying overnight because it's too late to drive home, or I have to factor in that drive home. So whereas if it's a multi-day, like if I'm seeing multiple days of severe weather where I can actually follow a system east and maybe have 2 or 3 opportunities to chase the system, then I'll chase much further and stay overnight in hotels. So it really does depend. But I'm not going to chase like a garden variety thunder shower 6 hours away from here. I might go for 30 minutes.
Now we've seen over the past couple of years, there have been fatalities with a few storm chasers, sadly, and I guess that begs the question: can you safely storm chase? And what I would like to know is where is there a line in the sand that's there that if something is going on weather-wise that appears it's going to be too threatening, where you put yourself, where you run the risk of putting yourself in danger, where you say, you know what, I'm not going to do this, and take a step back?
Yeah. Yes, for me. I think it depends on who you ask. Everybody has a different threshold, and I think there are some storm chasers who like to get within inches of an outer circulation, and you would like to think that everyone is kind of consciously taking in that risk and making a serious decision about what's right for them. What I would say about the stuff that's happened in the last couple of years, being some chasers, is those were all road accidents.
Yes, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah. And honestly, in my opinion, driving is significantly more dangerous for storm chasers than the storms themselves, 9 times out of 10. I mean, obviously, we have some exceptions to that, like what happened with El Reno tornado in Oklahoma in 2013 was a completely separate issue, right? That was the largest tornado on record, and it grew at record speed and then deviated from its path. But when you look at a lot of these issues, there are things that happen on the road that really could happen to anyone. And so that's where it's kind of like you have to say to yourself, okay, I know that I'm taking a risk here. How am I going to keep myself safe? What does that require? Does it require a person in the passenger seat keeping an eye on traffic while I'm doing something else? Will I make sure that if I need to look at radar, I'm going to pull over every time? I mean, I think everyone has different rules, but these conversations are escalating in the chase community. I'm hosting an educational event this year, as well as the National Storm Chaser Summit is hosting an event. We're both having quite significant sessions on safety and how we can make sure chasers are keeping each other and ourselves safe as we're doing that. And then, frankly, it's like we all take a risk when we walk out of the house in the morning, right? You can fall off the sidewalk
Right.
and fall in front of a car. And I think to a large degree with storms, as long as you understand what you're doing and keep a safe distance, chasing can be done very safely from that perspective. I think it's the folks who really like to get in close, get into large hail cores, that type of thing, where things can get risky and you don't always have control over your environment. So it just depends. I personally feel like I spend a significant percent of time running away from large hail. Like that's somehow,
Well,
I'm
that
not
could
sure
hurt.
how that happens. Yeah.
That could hurt.
I've had some weird encounters with hail where I'm like not even close and it's just flying miles from the core. But yeah.
Broadcast journalists, by the way, more and more, and especially I suppose on the Weather Channel, this is, I guess, the members of the Jim Cantori Disciple Squad or whatever. You're seeing more and more of these, even local newscasts. We were under a major tornado watch, and we've got so and so out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
And here's this guy, and he's focused in on a tornado, and he's telling you how dynamic this whole thing is. And all of a sudden, he says, "Oh my goodness, the tornado! I think that thing is coming right at us." Hey, Joe, Joe happens to be the guy who's driving the weather van. Joe, we got to get out of here, Joe. We got to get out of here. And like, all of a sudden, zoom. But I mean, like, you have people who are putting themselves in the path of these things, but simply for bringing up the ratings, getting more people to watch. And that's, I think sometimes you have to figure, if the news director says to me, "Joe, you're going to go right out in the midst of all of this," I'd have to think about this for a while before saying yes to that.
Yeah, well, and I actually, it tracks back to why I think there's been a discrepancy in media coverage between men and women storm chasing, because there are actually quite a few storm chasers who are in the path, and that's typically actually a pretty standard position for storm chasing is you want to be east of a east moving storm, basically, because that's where you get the clear view and you're not dealing with precipitation getting in the way potentially. But a lot of folks will do it from a safe distance and maintain a safe distance, but that's not necessarily going to get you clicks and ratings. So the media tends to skew toward folks who are doing potentially dangerous or appear to be more dangerous or are too close or things like that, because it's the same thing as if it bleeds, it leads. And so I think that's where you get into kind of a gender differentiation where there are just more men out there who are willing to blow out windshields and get into outer circulations. And that's what the media is going to go after because they think that's what people want to see, right? Because it gets them clicks and views and all. So it's been an interesting pattern to discover where, again, it's like nobody's doing this on purpose. It's just the media covering what the media always covers, and it happens to be more men.
And not just more
to do that.
And not just more clicks, by the way, and higher ratings, but one year I was a judge for the annual Emmy Awards. I think it was out somewhere in Missouri, and they send to you the various potential nominees, and I got two from one station. One of these stations, one of these prospective nominees, sent me a video which showed what I just described to you: the guy doing coverage. Tornado, there it is out there. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of his reporting, he says, "Oh my God, that thing is heading right for us. Joe, let's go. We got to get out of here." And all of a sudden you see the door slam and, getting out of that was one prospective nominee. The other I got from the same station was from the chief meteorologist who was standing in front of his chroma key wall watching all of this, watching his colleague out there risking life and limb, standing in the midst of a tornado. But he's in the studio, and he's reporting on this. And after I watched both of them, I said, now, who am I going to vote for the possible Emmy nomination? Is it going to be the guy who's safely tucked in the studio, or is it going to be the guy who's in the van running as fast as he can away from the tornado? I think you can guess which one I gave the nomination to.
Well, and to be honest, I don't know that they're like, we've now seen several instances of in-studio meteorologists essentially watching a tragedy unfold as, a large tornado strikes an urban area like Tuscaloosa, Alabama is a perfect example of that. And they have to keep it together, right? Because their job is to report and to warn people. But can you imagine how they must be feeling, right?
We had that,
and they're live.
well, we had that here last week. I'm in Northeast Georgia, so I get to see all the Atlanta stations, and they were covering
Yep.
a tornado that went through an area south of Atlanta that got hit
Yep.
very badly, and it was all
Yep.
live on the air.
And I don't want to belittle it. I don't want to belittle it. I've just made fun of the one guy who's out there where the tornado was and the guy who was in the studio. But sometimes the guy who's in the studio, case in point, I remember seeing this from years and years ago when in the aftermath or the approach actually of a major hurricane. And here's a legendary name, Brian Norquist, down in Florida, and they were taking phone calls from viewers. People asking questions about what they should do as the hurricane was approaching. And there was one person who literally, it was a woman who was crying her eyes out, saying, "I don't know what I'm going to do," and Brian like trying to soothe her and trying desperately to calm her down, telling her it's going to be okay, everything is all right or whatever. And it struck me as the fact that here is a guy who was highly regarded in the field, not just on television, but also in the field of meteorology, who was using that time that he had on the air to help soothe everybody's nerves, tell everybody to calm down. And somebody who has that power is certainly needed in front of the television camera in the studio in times like this, or in the aftermath of somebody getting hit by a major tornadic outbreak or a thunderstorm, and all mayhem is going around. You need that soothing voice to help calm everybody's nerves, to quell everybody's nerves.
Yeah, it's funny how it's kind of like, well, wouldn't it be nice to get paid to be wrong 50% of the time until one day they're right? And then it really does change the relationship. And I mean, there's all kinds of case studies of situations like that, right? I mean, James Spann is famous for
legendary
being the
Alabama.
person who does that, right? He becomes the calm center when there's chaos going on in that area. And it is an important role. It's also an important role just in terms of keeping people safe. And it's such an odd dynamic because I feel like, right, they catch crap all the time for interrupting sporting events or somebody's favorite show to put a tornado warning up, or to warn about something.
Don't ever do it during an Alabama football game. And I'm not even saying that as a joke. That actually has happened quite a few times where there is, like you said, there's a sporting event on, and I forgot which was it, last year or a couple of years ago. It was an EF4 tornado maybe, or an EF3 or an EF4 that went through somewhere south of Birmingham, and that's exactly what happened. People called and complained that they cut into a football game.
Happens all the time.
And James Spann, by the way, I was privileged. I was at a National Weather Association conference about 10 years ago in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was one of the guest speakers. And I just came up to him and shook his hand. I said, "You are a legend. You are, as they say, a GOAT, the greatest of all time." Because everybody just is like moths running around a bright light in the summer night. They were all over him. I mean, I mentioned Brian Norquist. He was, of course, a legend in Florida, but James Spann was and still is a legend down in Alabama for all the years he's been down there.
Jen, Ms. Svallerite on the chat board asks, you had to learn how to read the weather models, parameters, and maps so you know where to head. Where and how did you learn this? And are there more STEM women in this? STEM being science, technology, environmental science, and math, correct?
Yeah, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Engineering,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yes, there are tons. And I frankly, so the big issue right now is there actually are some great resources out there to teach yourself how to forecast and work with weather models. but you have to know where to look. And so one of the first things I did was aggregate all of the best resources that I knew, actually on the Girls Who Chase website. So we now have a page dedicated to all of those aggregated resources. And a lot of them are great for entry level, where they're kind of broken down for any level of audience. So you don't have to be a technical specialist to teach yourself. So I essentially went on a chase tour my first year, decided, yes, this was indeed for me, and started to study every weekend. And I studied for 3 years every weekend. I was working full time at the time. So it was like Sundays from 3 to 7 or whatever. And eventually over time, started to pick it up. But then, of course, you have to apply those things. So we now offer an aggregated list. In addition, we are running our first education event. It's a virtual education event on March 4th. I'm calling spring training, pun intended, right? Just like in baseball, you got to shake the rust off and get ready for severe season. And it is meant to be affordable. It's meant to be for entry-level folks who want to get started. So I would highly recommend that as well. It's girlswhochase.com/spring training. And Storm Chaser, the National Storm Chaser Summit's always a great start as well. I do find that their education tends to come in more at the intermediate level. And then weather spotter classes with the National Weather Service is an excellent foundation. So I would start with weather spotter classes. Then I would move into, forecasting education resources. If you're able to afford it, maybe consider a storm chasing tour where you can ask questions and kind of experience it with experts. And then, when you feel ready, you can kind of take off on your own using all these different resources.
Chuck Cardillo on the chat board says, what is the lowest barometric reading you've recorded during a tornado chase? You often hear of people's ears popping like crazy. Is that from the rapid drop in the air pressure?
So for better or worse, I've actually experienced that once. I was actually on one of my chase tours, and they drove into basically blinding rain, and we're not sure because we couldn't see anything, which I would imagine would be the case if you drove into a circulation. But my ears started popping. There was no recorded barometric pressure drop because nobody was using instrumentation. But I'd have to go online and look up numbers. But I wouldn't recommend trying that yourself. It's not like that's a 0 out of 10.
Yeah, I don't want
experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it has to be. It cannot be fun. So, I'm kind of curious over how you're building this storm chase business, or you would like it to become a thriving business, and I'm wondering. Are you running into any what are some of the challenges that you must have in trying to do both the chasing part and the business part? And I'd be curious as to how you're managing that.
That's a great question. I mean, I didn't create Girls Who Chase as a business. I thought I was creating an Instagram page, and then it kind of took on a life of its own. And I think my background and career has lent itself to creating this media platform since I, worked in environmental and scientific public relations for the majority of my career. And so thinking about the best ways to not just tell everyone that, yes, there are women out there doing this as well, but to show them. So, storytelling, finding different ways of sharing content in media, doing, forecasting education, providing educational resources to kind of removing those barriers of access. However, the big hitch thus far has been finding ways to sustainably fund that. So, once I sort of, after the first 6 months, realized this wasn't just a temporary explosion, but was rather an entity taking on a life of its own that really was adding value to women in STEM and to empowering girls and women around weather. Of course, I started to think about how I was going to fund that. But really, my biggest challenge to date has been time. I mean, because it doesn't pay the bills, I also have to work to pay the bills. I'm now consulting. And it is really a full-fledged startup, and I'm the only one running it. So what that has translated to for the last year has been 80-hour days, 24/7.
I imagine, yes.
And even chasing was rough last year. So trying to figure out how to rein it in a bit, and what are we going to slow or stop temporarily so we can get really good at a few things, and then figuring out what that funding is going to look like, whether it's in the form of sponsorships or investment. The big issue with grants, I think right now is they take even more time to develop. But also I think the thing that's made us so effective is that we're free agents. So we're not beholden to any one funding agency or any area of support. So we can be candid about what's true, what's happening, and be able to be nimble and make changes as needed. So I think that's really the biggest issue right now, is finding sustainable funding sources. And of course, I don't want to turn around and ask the very folks this is meant to benefit to be my sustainable funding source. That's not fair. So it's having to go outside of the chase community and the weather community to find those things.
We don't usually like to get political here on this show in any way. We try to have a lot of fun watching weather evolve and weather models. So with that said, and certainly with respect to the subject matter at hand, Cecilia Hernandez asks, have you encountered any misogyny in this process of you trying to build this, not only build this community you have of women storm chasers, but also in terms of trying to grow it as a business?
I'm really pleased to say no. I certainly encountered it in my career. And that's part of what drove the creation initially. But I think the thing that we did right, and part of the reason it's been so successful, is this is not a Jen Walton endeavor or even a women in storm chasing endeavor. This is a chase community endeavor. Everyone has participated in coming up with the concept, making it what it is, contributing ideas, supporting it in ways that they know how to support it. And I really have not witnessed the chase community make any attempt to do anything but continue to grow it and make it better. And that's been a fantastic experience for me.
Good. Oh, and Steve Lapointe, also on the chat board, asks, have you done a hurricane chase yet?
No. If I could teleport into an eye, I would. I don't want to stick around for the rest. So hurricane chasing probably won't be my thing. But I've got plenty of friends who do.
Snowstorm chasing is not on your list of priorities either, correct?
No choice. I mean, sometimes I get stuck. I'll snowstorm chase occasionally, especially if I think I'm going to get great video footage that I can broker. But yeah,
well,
hurricane chasing, man.
At the end of the day, you got to eat.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Totally understand that. Absolutely. At the end of the day, you got to eat. You have to support your family. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Joe, by the way, I'm going to put up. Well, right now I have pinned at the top, for those of you who want to visit, go to Jen Walton's the website for Girls Who Chase is pinned up at the top of the chat board. I'm also going to put up, if you're interested and you'd like to support Girls Who Chase, there is a Patreon page for that. Patreon.com, Girls Who Chase. And now I'm going to pin that on the top of the chat board for those of you who, again, would like to support Girls Who Chase.
We have a question. We have a question, Joe, on the chat board right below your pinning of the Patreon site from Eric DJZ, and he asking the question of our guest tonight: would you work for the big networks like the Weather Channel or AccuWeather or even like to be sponsored by TV?
Yeah, that's a complicated question because part of the reason that Girls Who Chase exploded the way it did is due to their support. And a lot of their support is due to female broadcast meteorologists insisting this be covered. So I've actually conversed with a couple weather networks about making a concerted effort to get more women on air. So whether that's kind of like live from the field or doing kind of phoners just following a severe weather event or something of that nature. So at a minimum, we can kind of balance out some of that coverage and make sure that, you know, if there are girls and women watching those networks, that they're seeing girls and women doing these kinds of things. And yes, those conversations have happened. I feel like they are these kind of longer term where everyone's evolving in one direction or another, but you may see more of Girls Who Chase on a couple weather networks in the future.
Mark DeCara, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
I was just going to finish off on the conversation. I think that if these companies like the Weather Channel, for example, if they ever have editorial meetings amongst themselves and trying to think about something, kicking ideas around, which have been kicked around 100 times, maybe, just maybe, if somebody says, thinking outside the box, hey, what about, you know, Girls Who Chase Storms or whatever? I've heard about that. You know, that just might open the door for you. Because it is something different.
Usually those conversations in TV, whatever, in these production meetings, when you come up with an idea, Jen, this is how it usually goes. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And those conversations are taking place at the ABC station, the CBS station, the NBC station, the independent news stations, and then one day somebody will do it. And then suddenly it becomes the great idea, and they'll all do it. So you just have
to
you have to really get have to get that one person that to make that decision, and then you're on your way, because the rest of them will just follow like lemmings.
The guy at the head of the table will say something like, "Well, I don't know. Let me see. Girls chasing after what could be killer storms." And so what happens if there's somebody gets seriously hurt or gets killed in that? And meanwhile, they're working on a network where they're showing have a reality show each week where somebody is dangling by their hair over the Grand Canyon, trying to beat up, you know, that sells. So but true. something that tries to work with an erudite, interesting, you know, way to actually learn something about storms or whatever. They say, well, I don't know. I don't think so, whatever. You know, it's and Joe and I, we've been banging our heads against the wall for years, trying to see the one day the tide will turn. One day, as I say sometimes to Joe, wait till the revolution. We may not be here when the revolution happens, but at least we're fighting for it.
Mark DeCara asked a question that I think it's a great question, because it never really occurred to me. When you chase, Jen, what about a nighttime tornado? How do you handle that? Or have you had to?
Yeah, I've definitely chased dangerous supercells at night that have been tornado warned. For me personally, it really depends on a lot of factors. I always keep much more distance. So I'm not going to flirt with tornadic storms where I can't see things, especially because you could be dealing with satellite tornadoes or, a massive gust front that's actually much more severe than you might expect. There's just all kinds of things that could happen, and you don't know until it's too late, basically. I honestly, if I don't have a photography opportunity, I'm probably more likely to just head home than anything, because if I can't see it, it really doesn't do much for me to be in proximity to a tornado, I guess. Obviously, if I am one of the few chasers out there and there's a need to be working with the Weather Service in a reporting capacity, I'll stick around. But if it's me and 500 of my best friends, I'll probably head home.
Now, and I'll be right there with you, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just dangerous.
Jen,
it really is.
Jen,
Yeah.
we've gone 50 minutes, and it's it's been really really wonderful having you here. I'm so glad that you took the time out to join us tonight. I just would like you here now. You could take the opportunity to tell everybody about your website. Tell everybody about how you can how to support Girls Who Chase and any kind of special
Totally.
the products, projects, whatever. I'll give you you got the floor for a few minutes. Go ahead.
Well, thanks. I mean, I certainly appreciate this, and I appreciate the support and pinning our Patreon page, especially when you guys have a Patreon as well. That's really nice of you.
No problem.
Everything is at girlswhochase.com. We're on Twitter and Instagram at the Girls Who Chase handle. And the best way to support us, I mean, there's options. You can actually donate, and there is a link to do that on our website. So we've got a support tab. If you go to girlswhochase.com, that will also take you to the Patreon page, as well as give you an opportunity to donate. We are looking for sponsors right now who will help us grow out our education arms. So I mentioned we're hosting a virtual education day-long event March 4th called Spring Training. That's another way to, check us out, get involved. And then the other area that we're very slowly growing into is actually K-12. So that is essentially doing severe weather awareness work in schools. We're hoping to kind of scale that at the national level. And we're certainly looking for folks to support that in a sustainable way for a partner we might be able to work with, because that's a lot of work to build that program out. The idea with that really is, while there is severe weather awareness that can happen, that's done by local meteorologists or science educators in the area, it's not necessarily delivered by women. And we're finding anecdotally already that having women doing these kinds of projects is eye-opening to girls in the classroom. So just another way to show girls that girls can do anything. So those are kind of our two big endeavors right now. Other than that, I am just counting the days until severe season starts over here and I can get back out there and start catching some storms and be done with this snow. So thanks very much for having me.
And thank you for taking the time. I know you have as you said, you're working 80-hour weeks, and I thank you for taking the time to join us here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Come back. We'd love to have you back. Maybe one day down the road, and you can update us on what's going on, or maybe when you have a storm chase happening.
For sure.
Maybe in the wake of a major. I don't want to say super outbreak because that implies a lot of damage and possibly even a lot of fatalities, and we certainly don't want to see that to happen. But when tornadoes are, one of the top spots in the news later on in the spring, and they will be, you're certainly invited back to come and talk about that. And who knows, you may even have an eyewitness account of one of those storms.
We always hope for. I always say I'd love to see a nice wedge tornado spinning in a field. Like that's you
and
hope for the best.
and let it stay in that field.
Exactly.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes. Yep.
Jen, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you.
It was wonderful, and we'll stay in touch, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Passing it off. Happy snow hunting.
Yeah. Good night. And we're here and we're back. That was good. That was great actually. Very informative. There was a lot that I didn't know about the mechanics of storm chasing, and she was a great guest. Good to have her back.
Very, very well spoken person. Sometimes you get an interview with somebody who is just loaded with information, but they simply cannot get it out in English language or get it out in such a way that it's understandable.
Or every question is a yes.
Yes,
no.
Exactly.
Yes. Maybe.
And I've had a few of those in my life. Yeah.
And you're right. And you're like, can you elaborate, please? You're trying to just yank it out.
Right.
All right, everybody's
Exactly.
clamoring about the maps. Leon Probitsky, thank you for hitting Super Chat. Also, Steve Lapointe, thank you for hitting Super Chat. And, well, we did 1 hour, so now let's go to the next hour, which is going to be about what is going on. So why don't we start, Joe, with let's start with the advisories that are up. And, the general summary here is that from the standpoint of going forward, certainly we are in an active weather pattern. We're going to see 3 storms at least. And actually, the GFS late this afternoon kind of made a case for maybe a 4th storm in the sequence. And, as I'm looking at this, Joe, and thinking, if only we had a little bit more cold air. And this could have been a really exciting stretch. Instead, we're struggling. We're going to be struggling with track. Now, I think that the model runs today indicate that it's a little bit colder. Everything seems to be a little bit colder, a little bit more to the right. Whether that ultimately means that snows are going to be inland with mostly rain at the coast, or will there be some opportunities where some coastal areas will see some snow out of this in the next 10 days? That I think we've got time and many model runs to go.
I agree with you. I agree. And yeah, things are going to be moving very quickly. I mean, this is a very fast moving, very progressive pattern. And yeah, at least 3. As you pointed out later today, the GFS hinting of possibly a 4th atrocity.
Yeah.
That's a Cioffiism, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, it is, and I take full credit for it. The thing is, each one of those storms, as we talked about last night, has a function in all of this, and it's each one is going to try to move the mean position of the trough in the eastern part of the United States that's developing and try to shift it a little bit further to the east, because right now it's too far west. And as a result, you're seeing what you're seeing here on the watches and warnings map, which is a storm track that is running from Kansas to Lake Michigan. And as a result, on the northwest side of that, on the cold side, you see where all the winter storm warnings are. Northeastern Colorado, northwest Kansas, most of Nebraska, southeast South Dakota, northwestern Iowa, southeastern Minnesota, into Wisconsin and in the Upper Peninsula. Now, we do have, Joe, winter weather advisories up across northern Pennsylvania, including northeastern Pennsylvania, the middle and upper Hudson Valley. So it's up in the Catskills, and you got to go north of Dutchess County into Ulster and northern Ulster and Columbia counties northward through upstate New York. And this is going to be probably for some mixed precip. And we have winter storm advisories also into much of Massachusetts except for the coast, northwestern Connecticut, and they have winter storm watches up for southern New Hampshire and coastal Maine. Now, a lot of this too, especially as you go further east, some of that is for maybe a changeover to snow on the backside, which won't make it down to New York City and Philadelphia, but could very well make it to Boston and Hartford.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe about that far south. I'm just looking on the chat board, and Craig Carlberg is asking, what is that beige-like blotch in South Carolina? And believe it or not, that is lake wind. Well, Quincy McCoy just answered the question on the chat board. It's a lake wind advisory. That's what you see that blotch in South Carolina for.
And hold on a second. I'm just trying to get some. I needed some.
And Chuck Cardillo hitting the chat board. Thank you very much. And Chuck says, and I think he speaks for a lot of people on the chat board, thank you very much for a great show with Jen. I learned a lot. So did we. So did we.
Oh, so did we. Absolutely. We do have, by the way, some leftover tornado watch, what's left of it now, running across western Mississippi into parts of Louisiana. A lot of wind advisories up in Tennessee, northern Alabama, Kentucky. As you said, the lake wind advisory that we see in South Carolina. Wind advisories in southern Louisiana, West Texas. Winter weather advisories out in the west again. The northern half of Arizona, much of northern Nevada, and of course Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades. Probably another situation where they got a winter weather advisory for 50 feet of snow, but that's how they that's basically how they do it out there. And on the satellite tonight, unlike the system yesterday, which had no room, this one's got more room to play with, and we're going to see some rain out of this, and you can still see some lightning strikes. It looks like the severe weather has kind of peaked out with this storm. It was very active earlier today in East Texas and Northwest Louisiana to Arkansas, but it looks like those cells have diminished. But this system's going to hold together, so there's going to be some rain to get through in the Northeast and Northern Mid-Atlantic states on Thursday.
Right, right. So we got a wet day coming up tomorrow. Things will start clearing out first thing on Friday morning. Again, I for this first system, it looks like for the immediate tri-state area and for the lower Hudson Valley, 99% of this is going to be all rain. You have to go up again, as Joe mentioned, up into the Catskills, on up toward, for example, up toward the Albany area or further north and west to get into the possibility for some snow. And then we have another system coming our way on Sunday, and yet a third system that'll be coming our way for about the middle of next week, next Wednesday.
By the way, I want to just mention this from a forecasting mentality perspective. I'm having a difficult time with these storms and trying to figure out who's going to get snow or if there's going to be any kind of changeover or anything like that. And the reason for that, Joe, and I think you'll agree with me. Here we are at January 18th. Now, if this were a more active winter, I don't want to say a typical winter because usually typical winters in the north, there's nothing really. I don't know what that even means because it seems like in most years either you get a lot or you get very little, and obviously we're in one of these get very little situations where we are. But having not seen any real snow events, it's left me because usually you need the first couple. After, I mean, Jen mentioned it too. When you come into the season, you're rusty, and
right.
We haven't. Here we are in the middle of January, and I haven't shaken off that rust. So I don't have a real good feel for these systems coming up. And I'll give you an example. I was looking to see with what they have up in terms of advisories in northern parts of northern Connecticut and in Massachusetts and over in the Boston area. And I was looking at some of the models, and I just kept thinking, am I missing something here? Because it looks to me like the change to snow and some of the snow amounts being spoken of in those areas seems a bit overstated to me. I mean, am I missing something, or is it just my rustiness?
No, we always say every year that we rarely ever hit on the nose the first snowfall, the first significant snowfall, because there's always something that we miss or something that we overlooked or whatever. And again, we haven't even had a chance, at least in the immediate tri-state area, to make such a call, because the only thing that has come close to that was a system on Sunday, December 11th, and that only dropped in my area about an inch of snow, hardly put anything more than a trace down in Central Park. We are still waiting for the first real snowfall of the season, and there's some concern because, again, as you said, Joe, we're still trying to shake off the rust from last March, for God's sake.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just having a difficult time with it. Here's the radar tonight, and obviously the system in the coming out of the plains is a real standout here. You can see the showers and heavier rains and thunderstorms in Indiana, Illinois. And then it narrows down to the line with the cold front of showers and some thunderstorms. There are some stronger cells in Louisiana and also in Mississippi, but we only have one severe thunderstorm warning in play right now. The Storm Prediction Center had a slight risk in this area earlier today, and as I said, it seems to have peaked out mid and late afternoon, and now these cells are less impressive than what they were before. Also, we've got snow. You can see the rotation there in central Nebraska. So we've got snow that's backed out through much of the state and down into northwest Kansas, and also moisture lifting up into Iowa that's kind of arcing back westward around that low. And then here comes more energy in the Pacific Northwest. where we've got snow in the mountains and some rain along the coast from north of San Francisco up the coastline. But this is nothing like what they were experiencing. The fire hose, Joe, has gone. The fire hose pattern that set up right around Christmas time has now spent itself, and what we're seeing here going forward really is in the transition to whatever it is we're going to wind up with ultimately. Uh, the painful pattern change that goes along with it, and oftentimes it's in that transition period that you wind up getting big storms somewhere. And I kind of have my eyes open on all these systems that are coming along in case one of them decides to overperform.
Yeah, I like to, the pattern that we're in right now that's so very progressive and so very changeable. I almost like to use what I call the hockey analogy, where you've got one man down, you're on the team that has 4 men, the other team has 5, and now they're coming at your goalie and shooting everything left and right at the goalie, and you kind of wonder whether or not, out of all those shots that are being taken, again, since you're one man down, or that since everything is moving so rapidly, that somebody is ultimately going to score. And that's what we're looking at over the next week to 10 days. You've got these 3, possibly 4 disturbances, and you're wondering whether or not, if you are a snow lover, for example, you're wondering whether or not you're finally going to score with one of those systems. I can tell you, you're not going to score with the one coming up tomorrow, and you're not going to score, I think, to any great degree on Sunday. But the one coming up for the middle part of next week, again, with each passing disturbance, the trough kind of edges a little bit more to the east, and there's just a little bit more cold air coming in, and you're wondering whether or not there'll be just enough cold air to sustain a significant snowfall, maybe, for the one coming our way for the middle of next week, or even for one that might be coming beyond that for the end of next week.
Right, and very important that each one of these storms is going to impact the one behind it. And we talked about that last night. And you're I think you're correct. Of these 3 systems, the first 2 to me don't really, I'm not really too enthused by it from the standpoint of.
I mean, if you want on Sunday, Sunday you want to mention, at least here in the Lower Hudson Valley, I mentioned on yesterday's forecast that or for Monday morning, rain possibly mixed with some wet snowflakes. I didn't say anything about accumulation.
Right.
I didn't even mention changeover to wet snow. I said, yeah, you might see some wet snow, maybe, but even then, that's not what people are waiting for or looking for is the one that's going to put down an accumulation. That's not going to happen with the first 2. The
right.
third storm, middle of next week, that may be a different story. Maybe.
So here's the upper air, so we can kind of just describe what we're talking about here with respect to trying to get this, this sort of mean trough position to move a little bit further to the east. You've got a ridge right along the east coast that's popped up because you've got energy in the west, both in the northwest dropping southward, and then there's a short wave that's off Baja California. And then, of course, you've got this upper low, and this is the storm for tonight. So everything is kind of moving very, relatively quickly from west to east. Therefore, whatever, we don't have any cold air right now, so that goes out. The ridge moves out, allowing for this upper low to move eastward, and then kind of translates its energy to off the coast of southeastern New England come later Thursday night into Friday. So that goes out. Now, when that happens, the ridge gets flattened, obviously. The next round of energy coming in, and you see the next trough shaping up, is by the time we get to Sunday morning, is in this north-south position right here. Okay, you've got a ridge along the west coast, so you kind of, your flow's like this. Now the ridge in the east pops up ahead of it, but now that ridge axis, instead of being to our west, is more along the coast. So we're kind of making a little bit of progress here to try to shift this whole trough position, to start shifting that mean position further east. And that's what the second storm is going to try to do. You see it there. It sort of moves across, the upper feature moves across upstate New York, and then wraps up into an upper low in southeastern New Hampshire. probably will cause a deepening surface storm. That goes out. And now you've got a new upper trough that's dropping down in the Dakotas. And you see it here, down into Missouri and Kansas. Once again, the ridge pops up, but again, a little bit less than when it popped up ahead of the Sunday system and a little bit less than what it's popping up for the system for tomorrow. So then that upper low gets to swing a little bit further to the east. And it's with this that maybe we stand a chance, a possibility, uh, depending on how the surface low winds up tracking. And then the GFS, anyway, wants to leave this trough in the east. And then I don't know if this is real, Joe. It drops down this really vigorous upper low into Minnesota and into the Ohio Valley. I mean, pretty wrapped up here as it swings it through the upper Ohio Valley into the northeast. Now, if it could dig a little bit further to the south and east, then we could see something pretty interesting here.
Exciting.
For the latter part of next week. This would be actually for this would be for Sunday, January 29th,
not this
and
week,
Monday the 30th.
Not this weekend, but the following weekend.
Right. So obviously the upper air is changing, and a couple of things that I would note. First of all, I don't know if that fourth system is real. Because it wasn't really shown very much on the 12Z run that I from what I saw, and the 18Z run has a much better finish at the end of the period than the 12Z run does, because it doesn't go back to this fire hose in the west per se. I mean, it still leaves troughing in the east while it's starting to bring in some energy off the Pacific into the northwest part of the United States, which is a little bit better.
And the unfortunate thing also is the fact that this is beyond the fourth system, the one for the 30th of January. That's beyond 240 hours at the moment. So you can't say, okay, that's what the GFS says. What does the European say? Because the operational European doesn't go out that far. So you really can't make any oranges to apples comparisons yet. But if that system, even in a weakened form, you said that the 18Z, that's not surprising. The 18Z always takes systems and goes crazy with them. Yeah. But I mean, if it's still being shown to some degree on the 12 or 0Z runs, and we get within a 240-hour period, and the European starts picking up on it, then things could get rather interesting for toward the end of next week, or for not this weekend, but the following weekend.
Well, and the other thing is, I'm looking now at the 12Z GFS, where there's really no hint of that system behind the one for later next week. I mean, it just kind of has energy around the trough that comes around, but doesn't really dig any kind of upper low. And in fact, once that trough pulls out, it goes back to that fire hose horror that we just had. I mean, this is this is back to the pattern that we had with the fire hose extending into the west, and then there's no cold air to speak of with a southwest flow aloft along the eastern seaboard, ridge in the east, trough in the west. Now, what the 18Z would imply, I think, is that that system that it's showing, and I'll just go back to it. You can see the difference between this is the 18Z and here's the 12Z. The 12Z just has sort of an open trough there. The 18Z has a wrapped up cutoff that digs. That system goes up into eastern Canada and kind of holds there and then swings over toward Greenland. It doesn't allow as much troughing in the west. You have a much better looking upper air on the 18Z. This would be for February 3rd. So it's that system is important in how the ultimate long range turns out. So we'll have, like you said, Joe, if it shows up on the 0Z run, we could have a little more confidence in it than from what it's showing us right now.
Right. So they say sometimes you have to wait for good things, and for all of you who have been sitting there and saying, when is this all going to end? It might just come to an end at the end of the month with your nightmare of no snow or cold weather, and you may have a surprise for the end of the month. We'll have to wait and see.
7-day rainfall totals from WPC, and it's no wonder with three weather systems. We're looking at least an inch and a half of liquid. It's not rainfall totals, it's liquid precip. An inch and a half of liquid from across Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and into Maine. And the darker purples are 2 inches. The reddish areas that you see over parts of Connecticut and southeastern New England are 2.5 inches or more. Also in the southeast, and across the Gulf states, we're looking at a fairly large area of an inch and a half to 3 inches of rain plus. And look at the West, Joe. How long were we saying day after day after day for almost 3 weeks? 5 to 10 inches of rain or more. 5 to 10 inches of rain or more. This is about as dry a look for the next 7 days that the West Coast has seen in quite a while. We're talking,
that's absolutely true.
In some places, no rain at all in Southern California.
Right, and if the Climate Prediction Center is correct, it's only going to be getting drier as opposed to what we've been seeing of late in the coming days as that ridge tries to build and tries to flex its muscles, so to speak, over the next 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 days.
The probability, this is the 72-hour probability for at least 8. And you could see that there's a near 100% probability of at least 8 in parts of the eastern Nebraska. 50% extending into western Iowa, also 50% over the upper peninsula of Michigan and northeastern Wisconsin. If we go to 2, we can see how pretty much the area that you see the high probability of at least 2 inches is all under a winter storm warning. For the most part, anyway, from northeast. Well, now the warnings are down in northeastern Colorado because the snow's ended there, but from Nebraska northeastward up into Wisconsin. And then out west, we're still seeing higher probabilities of 50% or more down in the northern half of Arizona, much of northern Nevada, the Sierra Nevada mountains, and on up through the Cascades. And on the long range, I'm just going to see if they updated this. Sometimes they do an early evening update. Otherwise, no, this is the last one that they did was back a little bit before noon. So it was before the dayside guidance, especially you didn't have the New European with this. But for Sunday into Monday in the Northeast, they have the southern flank, Joe, of a probability of at least a few inches in northwest New Jersey. Looks like it just about goes across your driveway into Connecticut, except the coast, to most of Massachusetts except the southeast, and the darker green, 30 to 50%. So this is from Sunday morning to Monday morning with the Sunday system. Now, I don't know, is that southern edge too far south? I know it's only a 10 to 30% probability, but I just wonder whether that's a little bit overzealous. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I actually think that the edge of the 10% could actually be a little slightly more north of where I am.
Okay.
I really don't see anything more than just a little mix of wet snow mixing in with mainly rain pattern. I could be wrong, but this could very well be a CYA forecast on the WPC winter division part.
Correct. So I will. I'm gonna bring up the European. So the European keeps wanting to give the snow lovers a sense of optimism, and I'm gonna start with. Oh, I got the wrong one. Okay, they need the high resolution European. Here we go. Take a look at what's happening here, and let's put up the surface map because we kind of already went through the upper air. And I think one of the things the European seems to want to do, and this is such a change, the European was always the model that was the furthest to the left of the others. And the GFS was always the one that was too far to the right. Now they've seemed to switch roles lately, or at least so far this winter. The European seems to want to be too far to the right, and the GFS wants to be too far to the left. So, and the GFS has won that battle more often than not these last couple of months. So here's the first low, and you see it there. It goes into southern Michigan. There's a little flank of snow and sleet that the European develops tomorrow afternoon north of you. And I guess maybe they're looking at this and kind of going with the Europeans' idea that there's a little bit of some front end stuff, which is why they threw the advisory up. I just don't know. It's just not the cold air is so minimal.
Right.
Anyhow, that low winds up redeveloping it. You see it here over eastern Long Island. Some dark blue snow in southern Vermont and southern New Hampshire, and maybe kind of sneaking down into northeastern Mass. But that low goes out. Oh, I suddenly jumped to Monday. That was my fault. All right, so then that low goes out. Let me move that along. And you see the rain goes out with it. Then we turn drier and colder, but nothing out of the ordinary from the standpoint of cold. The next low is getting ready. You see it form there in the Gulf of Mexico, sitting right along the Florida Panhandle. The high goes up into Vermont. Your magical 540 thickness is in southern New Jersey, which is you'd like to have it down where the 546 is. And then here comes your low. The high kind of goes into a bad spot.
Right.
The low goes into eastern Virginia, rides up along the immediate coast, and it does have some snows inland. I mean, you don't have to go too far inland, but still, it's going to be more inland than any place else. The Catskills up to I-90 on this run, and then the low is a 989 low over Rhode Island, and then it's sitting over Boston with some heavy snows up in northern Maine and also back into New Hampshire and Vermont, and then that goes away. Gets pretty deep, Joe. Gets to a 74 low, and there is some cold air behind it. There's actually a little bit of a polar front there in the western lakes on Tuesday. Now here comes the next one, and that is in Louisiana there. This is Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, it's in northern Alabama. You got the high in not a bad place. It's in Quebec, northwest of Plattsburgh. Right. So the surface isn't too bad. And actually, you see what the European implies that there would be snow even at the coast at the start on Wednesday with a 95 low in eastern Virginia. And then it's off the east of the New Jersey coast. It did put down some snow amounts of several to 6 inches, and with higher amounts further inland, and the low just sits there as a 987 southeast of Montauk and Islip. If I'll go back to what I said yesterday, if the Sunday system's a little stronger, a little bit deeper, and pulls down just a little bit more cold air, it could make for a very interesting situation for the middle part of next week.
The only thing I would say with this particular system is that it's just a tad too strong for me. I've said this before. You don't really need, so boy, we need a big storm. You don't need a big storm. If you have enough cold air, you can make a fairly decent amount of snow with a relatively minor low pressure wave interacting with the cold air with that high pressure zone. And if this system turns out to be just a little bit too strong, Joe, remember the old Rosenblum's law, which is storms that intensify rapidly tend to go to the left. And if they do go, this one goes to the left, it'll draw in all of that very mild air from the ocean. And so, yeah, you may get the cheap thrill. You may get even an inch or two of snow initially, even at the coast. But if it goes to the left and draws in that moisture, boom, before you know it, it's going to be over to sleet and then finally plain rain. And then that's all you'll get during the heaviest part of the storm. But again, this is all speculation. We have to wait not for that storm. We have to wait to see what the other two storms ahead of it does to the atmosphere, to the trough, and that's when we'll know. As I've said before, more often than not, maybe it would have been better if all the models, all of them, were like the NAM and don't go out any further than 84 hours because once you're within 84, then then things look, in the overview of things in forecasting, that's close enough, and with enough data sets inputted into the computer models to make a reasonably good picture of what's going to happen. Beyond 84, for even the most super computer model run, it is going to be basically an educated guess, basing whatever's going to happen on whatever system came or systems came before the one that you're interested in. So there you go.
And I'm just kind of comparing the European to the GFS from earlier today. So if we take the European out, just to look at, is there going to be a fourth system the way the 18Z has?
Oh, wait a minute. I want to it's Cecilia Hernandez on the chat board. Joe Rayo, that's ridiculous if models only went out 84 hours. Come on. Well, I'll tell you what, Cecilia, let them only go out to 84 hours and make for those that are available to the general public, because sadly, unfortunately, ever since the internet came out and ever since they started with these 300-hour plus runs, you've got numerous websites and YouTube pages of people who grab on to the 300-hour prog and say, looky what's be coming our way for 10 days from now, 8 days from now. And then you stir the pot and you get everybody anxious and angry and if it was limited to only 84 hours, you could be assured that the accuracy would be, number one, much, much better, because you're only basing it on something within the 84-hour time frame. Because again, anything beyond 84, and this is why I probably would be voted down at every television station in America. If it were up to me, we'd get away from the stupid 10-day forecast and even the 7-day forecast, and we'd only go with 5-day forecasts. Because, in my opinion, beyond 5 days, you're going to start talking about potential big storms. You're stepping out on the plank, so to speak. Yeah. And you're and Joe, I've seen over and over again in this market, in this New York market, at least one, and sometimes two, but at least one weather forecaster who loves to show the snow numbers off of the European 7 days in advance. This is what we may be looking at next week. And and it just blows my, if my head were a volcano, the lava would be bulging out.
Oh, I hear quickly. You. And by the way, I just put up, this is the GFS, but the European has no real hint of what the GFS did this afternoon. But this is the map that it put out at 270 hours, which is, has a wrapped up animal sitting over southern New Jersey now, or actually in Delaware Bay. Now, I will guarantee you that had this map, had that low been put out at 40 and 70, and all of the Northeast was in that dark blue, these maps would have already appeared on social media. Okay, that's and that's to support Joe's point. I don't know that I necessarily agree with not having anything beyond 84 hours. I think ultimately it does come down to what is deemed to be responsible as far as putting the information out. I mean, you and I can sit here and we could talk about the mechanics. At least, on this show, we're allowed the content. Because of the fact that it's our show, okay, and we don't have a set on time, and we don't have to run commercials, and we don't answer to any people. We can show these maps, but at least we have the opportunity and the time to give them the context that they need to have. Okay, if you're going to show them, I mean, in terms of what we did tonight, Joe, we showed the maps, but we pointed out the mechanics of how those storms get there on the models and why they might be unrealistic. Particularly the last one, not the first three, but the last one. You can't do that on TV. So why even talk about? My argument is why even bring up something beyond the 6th or 7th day? If you want to make a general statement about the fact that the pattern looks like it might be stormy through the end of the month, okay, I could go for that. But if you're going on now on the 18th to talk about something on January 30th, you have to have rocks in your head. I mean, you shouldn't. That's something I would never. I certainly would never do.
Well, admittedly, we just spent about 5 minutes talking about and showing maps going out that far.
But we're not saying that. But we gave it context.
Right.
We
exactly.
gave it a lot of context.
And you and I go back. When we started, folks. When the Hurricane Center was putting out hurricane forecasts, the hurricane forecast didn't go out any further than 84 hours, and they put something underneath the forecast where they have
not for public dissemination.
Well, for intergovernmental use
only.
Only.
Or as we used to call it, Joe, the secret prog.
Yeah, exactly.
The secret prog.
And now, of course, you go out 5 days, And like I said, everybody just grabs on that and say, all right, the storm is going to be over Cape May, New Jersey in 5 days. And what are we going to do? And that didn't exist back in the day when everything was, more short term, more conservative. But we can't do anything about that anymore because the internet is the internet. And somebody on the chat board just said, Joe Rayo, yeah, it was Izzy soon forecast will be 2 weeks. So enjoy. Which, in other words, Joe Rayo, suck it up. It's only going to get longer.
I don't watch. I just don't watch. We had a first alert. They had a first alert for weather here on one of the stations for showers this morning. First alert.
Oh, we have that
for
up here.
A level 1 alert for showers.
Yeah. We have. I'll say it as everybody in the New York area is probably aware. CBS about a year ago started a campaign, the First Alert weather forecast, and they do a yellow warning if they think that something might, 5 days from now we'll give it a yellow alert, and then there's a red alert. Those are the only 2 colors I've seen so far, Joe, is yellow and red. I haven't seen any other multicolors on the 7-day forecast.
Oh God, Anyway, we are now at 3 minutes after 9. So I think
we should.
I think it's time that we say goodbye. I'm fading here. I'm starting to fade. I really enjoyed the show tonight. I hope she comes. I'd love to have her back on down the road. She was great, Jen Walton, and hopefully we could get. It's hard to get guests to come on the show. They're too difficult. They're too demanding.
The problem with getting local talent is that if they're affiliated with a television station, the first thing they have to do is they have to go into the news director or the executive producer's office and say, "Can I do this show?" And usually the answer is going to be a resounding no, because you are our exclusive, whatever you want to call them.
Like I said to Jen, you got to get the first one. If you can get one of them to come on, then the other person can say, well, so-and-so from, channel such and such was on.
Right.
They let him go on, and it taps into a weather audience or something along those lines. And then they'll all want to be begging to come on our show, Joe, begging.
I mean,
well, you know what? They can beg all they want.
Lonnie Quinn was on once. I asked Nick Gregory more than once, and more than once he said, "I'll have to get back to you," because he had to get, the high sign from his boss, and I guess he never did. I asked Joe Whitty. Now Joe Whitty's not even on television anymore. I said, "Joe, would you come on?" "Oh, sure, great."
He's not even on email.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had to say that.
Oh well, we're doing our best, folks. We're doing our best.
Yeah, it's very it is difficult. Everybody else is, people work and they got their own jobs and they have their own lives, and it's hard for them to get out for an hour. And Renata has just said it's time to say goodnight. So the executive producer has spoken.
Yes.
Okay. And on that note, folks,
good night, everybody.
Back tomorrow night. Back tomorrow night at 7:35. As long as I don't get a call from Dr. Harris that they're leaving for the hospital for Mrs. Ricardo, with Mrs. Ricardo. Okay? So otherwise, we will be back tomorrow night at 7:35 Eastern Time. Thanks for the Super Chat hits. Hope you love the show tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Nighty night.